Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview segment with Josh Brake. Josh is a professor of engineering at Harvey Mudd out in Southern California. I got to sit down with Josh at Baylor University. We were invited, thanks to the Institute for Faith and Learning at Baylor, we're invited out to do a lot of fascinating interviews, especially around tech, AI, and moral philosophy kinds of things. And Josh is one of those people after my own heart. He's an engineering professor, as I said, who also reads moral philosophy. And we just had a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed my time with Josh. And he raises so many important, fascinating kinds of questions that we need to be paying a lot more attention to. Hope you enjoy. Here's Josh Brake. Across the globe, researchers are finding that increased social media use is affecting people's happiness. So, why do so many of us feel like we can't log off, even when we want to? The Happiness Lab podcast is going straight to the source. Host Dr. Laurie Santos sits down with the authors of the 2026 World Happiness Report to unpack this year's most significant and surprising findings. From global trends in young people's well-being to the social pressures that keep the rest of us glued to our feeds, Dr. Santos breaks down the science in ways that could change how you use these platforms. I'm a longtime fan of the work of Professor Laurie Santos, professor at Yale. I've used her work for years in some of my own classes, and I happily recommend her podcast. Again, it's called The Happiness Lab, and you can listen to The Happiness Lab wherever you get your podcasts now. Hey friends, Lee Camp here. We all need advice, but it's not always clear who to ask, even in 2026, which is why I recommend checking out How To, the long-standing advice show and 2026 AMBY Award-nominated Best Personal Growth Podcast. No Small Endeavor was also just up for the very same award in that category, so you know How To must be a great companion to our show. More than that, How To is back with new episodes and a new host with award-winning journalist Mike Pesca. Each week, Mike tackles a listener question ranging from travel to finance to relationships and beyond, with help from world-class experts who actually know what they are talking about. Think of it as eavesdropping on someone else's therapy session without a copay or awkward silence. No questions too big or too specific, like how to protect the elderly from scammers, or how to give to a good cause and make it count, and even how to make a how-to podcast. You've got questions, they will find some answers, so follow How To with Mike Pesca on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Hello friends, Lee C. Camp here. If you enjoy the kinds of conversations we have here on No Small Endeavor about ideas, culture, and how we might make sense of the world, there's another show you might appreciate. It's called The Gist with Mike Pesca. The Gist is the longest running daily news podcast, and each weekday Mike takes about 30 minutes to examine the stories shaping our moment. What makes the show interesting is that it resists the usual partisan scripts. Mike brings on economists, historians, journalists, and other thinkers to look at issues from multiple angles. One day he might unpack the dynamics of a major political story. Another day he might explore the psychology behind public outrage or why we humans are so quick to believe strange things. Mike's an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in outlets like The Atlantic, The Free Press, and The Washington Post. His approach combines careful reporting with a sharp sense of humor and a willingness to question assumptions wherever they come from. If you're someone who likes thoughtful inquiry and conversations that challenge easy answers, give The Gist a listen. You can find The Gist every weekday on YouTube or follow wherever you get your podcasts. Josh Brake is an associate professor of engineering at Harvey Mudd College, who insists that engineers must bring philosophical, theological depth to their questions. He's also a venture partner with Praxis, an organization advancing so-called redemptive quests, where he focuses on how artificial intelligence can be harnessed for redemptive ends. Beyond the classroom and laboratory, you can also find him sharing on Substack his newsletter entitled The Absent-Minded Professor. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Lee. Great to be here.
Good to have you with us. Josh and I discovered yesterday that we met each other 10 years ago, I think it was.
Yep. Yeah.
On Catalina Island.
That's right. Beautiful
You're the
place.
Second person that I have met just in the last month who also met there on Catalina Island. So yes, yeah. So anyway, well, good to see you again.
Yes.
You seem to like metaphors.
I do.
So I want to start with some of your metaphors. So talk to us about AI as an e-bike.
Yeah. So there's this famous Steve Jobs metaphor of the computer as the bicycle for the mind. And he motivates this by looking at some data, which of course, as an engineer, I'm all for it. And he's got this plot, and the plot has your two axes. On the vertical axis is essentially your efficiency of locomotion as measured against the mass of the thing driving it. So you have jet planes, right, which are very heavy but can move a lot of things, and so those end up on a spot. And he plots all of these both man-made technological ways of moving and animals, horses, rats, birds, so on and so forth, all on this plot. And then he pulls out, he's got one data point, which is as far as the farthest point down on the vertical axis, and it's man on bicycle. And this spot on the graph is essentially the most efficient way of locomotion per unit mass. And so his point is to say, if you look at where man is on that for walking or running, when you give man a bicycle, it actually pushes him further down on this plot so that it is this very efficient point. And his point in saying that was that the bicycle is this tool, it's an instrument that actually enables humans to extend their capabilities and their capacity. They can go further just by giving them this tool that's actually powered by their own energy. It doesn't have external energy that's being pumped in there.
So very
just
efficient.
Reshaping it. Yeah, it's efficient, right? It makes you more efficient toward the goal of moving from one point to another. Allows you to go further. And as I was thinking about AI and my own personal, we just recently moved near Harvey Mudd in Claremont. And one of the things I love most about Claremont is it's extremely bikeable. But sometimes the challenge with biking, especially when you have a family, is that it's not just about getting you around, it's about getting your family around. And we have 3 kids, and to get them around is a little tricky, right? And the e-bike, I got a cargo e-bike earlier this year, which I love. You can put the 2 older kids on the back on the seat. And then I don't think they really encourage this, but you can attach the trailer to the back of the e-bike too, and then tow up to 2 more. My wife likes to remind me that there's still room for 1 more in there. But anyway, this is like a great way to get around town. And I think that it's interesting. We have all this conversation about e-bikes in our news, and there was a Washington Post piece a while back about, essentially shaking a fist at the sky about the e-bike riders and the teenagers. There's all these health issues that are public health kind of hazards with teenagers getting e-bikes and driving them around. There's all this controversy in New York City in Central Park about e-bikes and the way that they're whizzing around in Central Park. I've ridden an e-bike in Central Park. I know what they're talking about. Too. But what's interesting to me is I thought about AI and, Jobs has this computer as the bicycle for the mind. I think that AI in many ways can be like an e-bike for the mind. And the kind of analogy that I want to draw there is that the difference between the bicycle and the e-bike is that the e-bike actually adds energy in. So it's no longer just the human propelling it. It's actually, you have this battery boost along with it, right? You've got an electric motor that's in the hub or in your pedals to help you go. And for a lot of it just typifies for me, I think, technology and the way it can be used. And I think especially as we think about AI and the way that we're applying it, the analogy of the e-bike for the mind actually illustrates for me the promise and peril of these sorts of things. So on the one hand, you have teenagers, which given e-bikes, you can extend essentially dangerous or harmful behavior, right? Any sort of technology has affordances which actually enable greater evil to occur. But at the same time, you actually create the possibility for somebody like me, instead of having to drive around Claremont with my kids in the minivan, now we can take the e-bike, which is better for the environment. It's better for me, better for the kids. It's just all around a better way of getting around. And I think that it's this interesting sort of tension that we have to walk with technology, and especially as we're thinking about artificial intelligence, is to say, how do we balance the particular affordances, the new things that technology enable for us, understanding that those things always come alongside with new potential for evil, for harm, and benefit. And it's about this kind of discernment process. And as we get to more and more powerful technologies, that spread between the good and the bad opportunities is just going to get wider. It's kind of this, growing V shape that as you get to more and more powerful technology, the potential for good and the potential for evil continues to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Another metaphor you use, the knife's edge, kind of points to the fact that the complexities and the potential dangers are perhaps even more potentially frightening than perhaps we imagine. So unpack that one for us a little bit.
Yeah, so that was a story I was remembering when I was a teenager. I would go away to this boys' sleepaway camp up in upstate New York, Deerfoot Lodge. And these were like some of the most formative experiences, like 10 years when I was a kid, would go up there. And one of the years, they would have this trip called the Voyagers. And they would take you with about 10 other guys and 2 counselors that were, older college kids. And you'd go up and you would canoe for 2 weeks on the Allagash River up in Maine, basically right at the Canadian border. And before you started getting on the canoe trip, you would hike up Mount Katahdin, which is the northmost tip of the Appalachian Trail and the highest mountain I'm pretty sure it's on the eastern seaboard. I would, need to ask Claude to make sure that that's right. But anyway, one of the things one of the features on Katahdin is this particular piece of trail called the Knife's Edge. And it's called the Knife's Edge because it's very sharp. It's a very, very narrow trail, and it's got very steep drop-offs to either side. And I think that as we're thinking, my kind of experience as I've been working and using artificial intelligence is, in so many ways, it feels like we're walking along this knife's edge, trying to find the kind of thread the line between these potentially beneficial and potentially harmful applications of AI. And I don't think we're recognizing actually the narrowness of that line. It's very easy to fall off one or the other side as you're using it. And this has been true in my own personal experience. I've been spending a lot of time over this last year with Praxis building with AI. And one of the interesting things that I've discovered is that even in my own practice, and I like to think of myself as trying to be very thoughtful about the things that I'm building and considering the potential off-target effects and just, trying to really take that philosophical lens that I try to tell everybody else that they should be thinking about and actually do it myself, right? But I kind of found in building, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues and I was like, hey, here's the thing I was building this week and how I built it. And I was like, oh, I think I can just do this to get it in and build it this way and just like take these ideas from something else I saw and put it in. And my friend was like, well, hold on a minute. Like, do you really think that was an ethical use of the way that you were, like, is that really respecting the intellectual property of what was happening? And I was like, oh yeah, oops, right? It's like one of those things where it's like, you're just going and going and going. And this is, I think, a feature and a challenge of the speed at which it's that V shape all over again. It makes it so easy to move very quickly, but speed is often obviously directly competing with a contemplative way of actually seeing what you're doing. And so, I put that out there as this idea of walking along the knife's edge, just as trying to be a constant reminder to myself of, as an engineer, as somebody who loves to build, as somebody who's entrepreneurially minded and loves the new capability that AI is giving me to be able to take these things that are ideas that I think actually can be good in the world, to say that we need to build these habits of mind and practices which help us to understand and engage with what are we doing? And so much of that happens in community. And as we talk about these issues to our friends, I mean, there's so many different, the angles, that's only one moral hazard just from kind of my personal experience. But I mean, the technology is just really rampant with moral hazards everywhere you look.
Yeah.
That we really need to be, I think, stepping back and taking a deep look and developing, essentially, it's practices, habits of mind that allow us to both understand and take advantage of the power of the new technology, but also be really thoughtful about where we're aiming it. Because it's like I try to say, like, you have if you're shooting in the right, if you're going in the right direction, if you got a heading, the further you go without adjusting your heading, the more off target you can be from where you want to be. Yeah. So you really got to pay attention to your heading and try to quickly course correct.
Yeah. So I want to talk both about the potential hazards that you've pointed begun to point us to, as well as practices as potential antidotes or safeguards in that regard. But before we do that, so there's obviously lots of kind of, what do we want to call it, techno-utopian kind of visions in the world these days. You're neither, as I hear you and as I've read some of your work, I mean, I don't think of you as some sort of technology is going to fix everything. You're pretty critical of that on the one hand, and at the same time, you're also embracing it.
Yeah.
So talk to us about just the techno-utopian kind of vision, and what about that in particular concerns you or you find implausible?
Yeah. So much to say here.
Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting things to me about a lot of the techno-utopianism that's happening in culture, much of it, but not exclusively, coming from Silicon Valley, is that it's interesting to look. So I did this. This is actually Audrey Waters, who I read online, and she was the first one who pointed this out, which I thought was very insightful, which is, and ironically enough, OpenAI did this, New York Times did this piece on OpenAI a while back where they took these pictures of the library that's at the center of OpenAI's offices, this big, beautiful library. First question I have is like, I don't know, are they reading books in the OpenAI? I doubt it. Maybe while your AI agent is working, but that's not the typical flow now. It's just open up another parallel agent and like keep running. But it's very interesting to me to think about what are the stories that are actually motivating these companies that are building the tools. And if you start to look at the big tech founders, and you'll see if you follow their interviews and the way they talk, eventually you'll hear them talk about a particular novel story narrative that's actually motivated. It's something akin to their why, for why they're building. And what's very interesting about those is many of those, it will not be surprising probably to anyone, are science fiction novels. But what seems to have happened is they've, again, in my opinion, misread those dystopian novels in many cases as utopian novels. So they read a 1984 or they read a Brave New World, and they see that not in the way that I think they don't see it through the critical lens of, this is actually the way that this is a problem of how technology is going to shape us, which is the way I think in many cases those were written to kind of point out the potential ills that were going to come, but it's seen in a kind of utopian lens. And I think, even aside from the stories that they are reading and how those are kind of motivating and shaping them, there's this kind of fundamental idea. The question at the end of the day is like, what is the problem to which this is the solution? And it's a classic engineering kind of problem, which is to say, what's the actual problem you're trying to solve? And the right answer to the wrong question is the wrong answer. And I think that we need to do a little better job, maybe a much better job, figuring out, are we actually asking the right questions? Are we thinking about the direction that we're heading and how these things are put together? And really be more thoughtful about that and develop frameworks. And I think this is fundamentally where we have some challenges in the way that we are educating students, engineers, builders. The way that they're being formed and shaped has a certain direction. It's directed with a certain telos that oftentimes is formed by these stories without a full understanding or critique of what is the telos that's actually embedded in those stories.
Yeah. So people who have listened to No Small Endeavor would have heard us talk about teleological kind of considerations, but it is asking the question, what you're just asking, the why and the end, the purpose, the goal. But you and I have both read Jacques Ellul, and I have found it so interesting that I raise Jacques Ellul almost anytime I'm in a conversation with people who are in the tech world. I'll ask them if they're familiar with him. Almost never.
Yep.
Ramon Chowdhury was one of the few exceptions, and she's a very astute, political philosopher, but way up in the tech world. But one of his critiques is that, and he's writing in the 1950s, early 60s, and his critique is, the question that you say, that Josh says all the tech people should be asking, he's saying by definition they do not ask. That is that he defines technique as the means and ensemble of means without regard to ends.
Yep.
That is simply to do whatever you do faster or more efficiently without ever asking why.
Mm-hmm.
And so you seem to be saying, that's one of the major problems with which we find ourselves. That could potentially be devastating.
Right.
So unpack that a little bit more for us.
I mean, I think we've taken this part of what I think a core part of what it means to be human is to create. And as a Christian, that's really deeply formed in this idea of what it is to be made in the image of God. But even people who are not people of faith sense this kind of ineffability of the human person, and also this really deep, I think, joy and just real enjoyment of creation. And I think that there's something that's interesting there. If you think about Ellul and technique and his critique of that, I think it's essentially a distortion of what it means to create in the right way. It's a distortion of the creative process, because it is exactly, it's saying, hey, we have this thing. How can we make the means as efficient as possible without a consideration of what the thing is that we are producing, what that product is? And it's not that efficiency is bad or that we should be against efficiency. Some places we should be against efficiency, but it really is fundamentally a question of efficient to what end? Like, why are we doing this? Why is it more efficient? And this is a problem not just with AI, but one of the things I love about the technological critics of the mid-20th century is that in many cases, this was kind of my gateway into this conversation a number of years ago, was reading Neil Postman, which I think for many would be kind of the most maybe popular. He managed to put some better language on it, I think, than most. To invite folks into asking this question and these sets of questions. I think it's trying to get back to this, what are we building for? What are we building towards? And as we think about efficiency, which engineers like me start to get, really amped up about, like, how do I make this thing more efficient and less wasteful? Those are all good things. But the questions of what are we building for is actually, it's a different set of questions. It's a different set of questions, and it requires a different set of tools. One of the things I really appreciate about Ellul and Illich and McLuhan and Ursula Franklin and the rest of them is that I think they illustrate for us that we need to have this coupling of, and I don't know that they would say it quite this hopefully, but we need to have this coupling of the deep human questions about creation and what are we creating, coupled with the actual technological questions about the nuts and bolts, that we're actually, how we're building it and what we're doing. Those things actually need to be inextricably tied. And so much of, I think, what we're seeing right now in the development and space around artificial intelligence is what happens when you have a disconnection between those things, or not a very deeply integrated way of thinking about those things together. And some do this better than others, but certainly we could all deal with, it would be good for us to have some tighter integration of those things.
I was listening to a conversation just very recently, and someone was talking about efficiency, and that perhaps one of our practices should be inefficiency. And I found myself kind of scratching my head, because I thought that doesn't seem to be a helpful way to put it to me. I mean, because it's like, I don't know that anyone is really going to applaud let's say someone choosing to use a hand shovel to dig a ditch to lay a water pipe. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine a scenario right now. Then maybe there's one, but but generally speaking, I can't imagine that inefficiency for the sake of inefficiency is ever going to be a helpful sort of lived practice.
Yep.
But to ask the question you just asked, efficiency to what end, and also inefficiency to what end?
Yes,
right? Exactly. And so if we'll keep pushing ourselves to say to what end, that opens up a new kind of vision on this, because clearly there are places where inefficiency is going to be a terribly important human practice in all sorts of ways, but only when you say to these certain given ends.
That's correct.
So I don't know, any other commentary on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's smuggled in, but the whole question of efficiency is about it's essentially a ratio to say, like, what do you get for what you give? It's like a return on something, right? So typically when we think about efficiency in producing something, it's about how many resources were involved in the creation of this product, this thing. And it applies, I think, even outside, like the ditch digging example is a good one. Think about dishwashers, right? Washing the dishes by hand versus using a dishwasher. Dishwasher is more efficient, but I think you can make a case to say, well, where are you using the time and the energy that you would have spent washing the dishes now that you're using the dishwasher? If you're using that time, I think in our best visions, we think about efficiency as a good thing when we think about using the dishwasher so that we can spend more time with our kids. But I think the challenge, which again, I find myself falling into in many ways, is like, I'm not using that extra time. Maybe I'd use that time to spend with my kids, but more often than not, I'm drawn into something else that likely is probably worse for me than washing the dishes by hand. I'm just scrolling my phone or doing some more work or something, that answering more email, whatever. And not that any of those things are necessarily bad, but I think we do have to kind of ask this question again, not only as what is it for, but as we think about in practice, when we replace that thing with a more efficient means, we have this vision that it's just freeing us up to do something else. And it does create a certain vacuum where we could fill that with better things that would be better for us. But what we kind of recognize is, or if you pay attention to it, is that oftentimes when you open up that vacuum, if you're not very quick to fill it with something that's better, it gets filled with something that's worse. And I think this is the human condition. Yeah. That it's part of what it is to be made to have a sinful nature. It would be the Christian way to put it, or to be corrupt, or to not. Apostle Paul puts it, to be able to be able to do the things that I want to do. The things that I don't want to do are the things I do. Like this is the problem with any sort of efficient replacement, is not what is this replacing for me, but when it becomes more efficient, when I outsource that task, what am I replacing it with? And I think this is again ties directly into, as we think about artificial intelligence and how it's going to propagate throughout so many of our workplaces and the things that we're doing. We need to be asking not just like, okay, great, this is more efficient, but how are we using this to reshape what we're doing?
What are other potential dangers you see just simply with regard to efficiency?
I mean, I think that one of the things that can be often, in addition to thinking about what are the things that we're replacing it with, oftentimes when we think about something being more efficient, we're often smuggling in assumptions about other things that we can't see. So they're hiding beneath the surface. So if you think about artificial intelligence or really any sort of technology, there's the thing that you see that's there. It's the piece of it that's apparent to you, but it's like an iceberg. You can only see the tip of it. And what you don't often see is all the things that support it behind that. So with AI, you just see a chat interface, which feels to you essentially as if you're making a Google search or you're writing an email. And if you think about the energy implications of writing an email or doing that, I don't think most people actually have a good handle on what the energy, the natural resources, the extended cost of that is. But it's certainly much easier to get your handle on, your kind of hands around and your mind around than what it is when you send an AI query, for instance, or when you ask AI to generate something for you. Because when you do something like that, it takes the thing that you put into the thing you see and then sends it away to this other place, the data center somewhere, which is not near you. You can't see it. It's not transparent. And it does some things that you don't know or can't understand. And then it brings it back to you. But it's so much of it is hidden out of view that as you think about the thing that's more efficient, it's very hard also to keep in mind the cost of that, because you can't see it. And in many cases, you're intentionally prevented from seeing it for a variety of different reasons.
So it's efficient with regard to one's own individual perspective, but it may be highly inefficient looked at from other perspectives?
Correct. I mean, so you have to, I think the thing that I always talk about, and it's interesting to have these conversations around AI, a lot of the conversation right now is around the environmental impacts of AI, data impacts of AI. There's all these, back to the moral hazards, they're actually all baked in ways that we often don't see. But even when we talk about them,
Before you go on, can you
Yep.
give us some specifics in that regard of what people are seeing as far as potential environmental dangers?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that at the environmental side of things, it's really water, energy, and then material resources that you need to build the chips as three maybe of the top. There's obviously a lot, but those sorts of things are often very opaque to us. And we also don't really have good context. We're starting to get some more here and there. I've seen some pieces to come out to try to do this, but to try to put into context how our energy usage for something like using generative AI in our work compares to all the things that we already do in our daily lives that we don't even think about. You know, one of the examples that I like to give is if you are still eating beef and you're also complaining about the water usage or concerned about the water usage of generative AI, I think there's a little bit of a mismatch there because we don't think about, I mean, we know actually the water usage that it takes to produce beef that we eat. And I think that it's about trying to compare in context, what is the energy usage of this versus the energy usage of that? How do we actually have an apples to apples comparison? And I think as time goes on, we're going to get some better sense and reporting on some of these things. The other thing that's kind of challenging, though, is that technological innovation, the way it works is these things, we're sitting right now at a kind of a cusp when this new technology is enabled. We used to have computers that fill the size of rooms, and now we have some that are, you know, orders and orders and orders of magnitude more powerful that are just on our wrist or in our pocket, you know, all day long. And so we're also sitting in this moment where over time, it's also the technology itself will get more efficient on these metrics. And so it's a really tough space to try to get your head around. But I think it is a place where we need to be mindful, not only of what those external costs are, but even just to be aware that what are the externalities of all the things that we're doing, and how do we think about those in context to all the other, what's our daily energy use as a human? What is that? The things that we eat, the things that we do, the things that we use, our houses, you know, all these sorts of things. We have to have a holistic conversation, and it's a little dangerous, I think, to try to take one thing out of context and focus too closely on that without thinking about it in the broader scheme of things.
You mentioned a moment ago that there's opacity around some of these questions. And I think you said perhaps intentionally that there's a commitment so that we can't so easily answer the questions you were just asking about usage of resources and so forth. What's your take on why that is the case?
It slows you down. I mean, for the companies, they don't want that because it makes it's more complicated. At the very least, they're trying very desperately right now. I mean, it's very expensive to develop these new technologies, and any sort of new business, I mean, startups, you know the numbers, right? Most of them fail. And so it's very, very difficult to bring something new into the world and to cross that barrier to essentially become profitable so that it can support itself. And I think so one of the challenges, answering those questions puts in additional weights and burden that slows down and saps resources from this goal of trying to get it to a place where you're actually making it sustainable. So from the company's perspective, there's very little incentive, I think, to be transparent about these things because it's not really aligned with their core kind of goal of getting this thing across the line. And I think it's also, again, it's complicated because there is some hand waving about this thing getting more and more efficient over time. But I think that the biggest thing is that it's not valuable to the companies. And so this is where you have to get into this complicated, and I'm no legal scholar, and you know others know way better than me about suggestions on how to balance these things. But I think we do need to have some sort of, this is where regulation, and as we think about the incentive structures that get put in place, that's an important thing, because a lot of the times that the reason the technology gets more efficient or gets a certain way is because there's economic incentives put in place that actually force it in that direction and help to steer the technological innovation to say, if you are just not caring about the external resources and you're able to just stash the externalities somewhere else, then you're not even considering those in your system. And so you're just basically being able to spin faster. But as soon as we push those externalities so that they have to be considered into the innovation loop, then you actually put the focus on actually fixing those things.
Yeah.
So I think that's, in the healthiest way, I think that's where we need to think about the regulation is essentially incentive structure alignment. How do we align the incentives such that these things become beneficial more broadly?
Which that's just an extension of a longstanding conversation, the world of sustainability, where folks are wanting industry of whatever type to actually give an accounting for what the true cost is of what they do. Right. And rather than to act as if there's not an impact upon the rest of the world with the kind of work that they do. What other, going back to that knife's edge metaphor, what other kind of dangers are you especially attentive to right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think the big one, another one is the intellectual property, copyright. So again, the companies are all very cagey about this, but it's pretty clear that they stuffed whatever they possibly could get their AI mitts on into the training process for these. So there's the lawsuits from the New York Times and others that do this. And then there's the kind of pushback from Silicon Valley, which is, hey, it's just no different than if a human was reading it. It's like, really? I don't know. Like, it's complicated again. And I think there's this question fundamentally of, even if it's legal, even if we find that according to the laws that we have on the books, it's a legal way to do this, is it truly right and good and beautiful? Is it the way these things should be built? And I think that the moral hazard that I wrestle with too is these sort of decisions that have been made in the training of these things, we're all implicated in them in some way, form, or fashion. In many ways, you're implicated in them. Whenever you use the tool, you're interfacing with this, depending on how you want to call it, stolen material. Like that would be the stuff that has been taken without the consent of the people who created it. Now, where we end up landing on that, and there are some subtleties here. I don't want to make it sound like it's a black and white case, but I think that the complexity there for individual users is that a sense of complicity, essentially, by using these tools or being forced to use these tools because the old tools went away. And I think that this is really interesting. This is where I really like the Andy Crouch's innovation bargain framework, which basically has kind of these 4 questions about technology, which is now you can, now you no longer have to, now you cannot do, and now you must do. And basically the way that he frames these, and I like to kind of put these in a 2x2 diagram so that you have on the one axis the freedom versus limitation. So you always have more, technology always gives you more freedoms. It enables you to do new things. And it also has what Ursula Franklin would call foreclosing aspects. It's always enabling and foreclosing. There are certain things that it opens up and there are certain things that it closes down. And then in addition to that kind of enabling versus, limiting axis, you have another axis, which is talking about whether these are new freedoms that are being imposed or new limitations that are being imposed upon you. And so if you think about those axes, I find this a very helpful way to think about technology. What are the things that the technology is enabling that are new things that you're able to do? If you think about something like the smartphone, right, or a social media platform, it's like now you can answer your email wherever you want to, right? Now you no longer have to be at your desk or your computer to be able to answer your emails. That's normally the Silicon Valley pitch. That's it. We only talk about the new affordances, the new enabling aspects. Those are active and passive. So you have freedoms and limitations, and you have active freedoms that are enabled, and then passive freedoms, which happen when you no longer have to do something. You're taken away from it. But if you look below the horizontal axis at the limitations, now this is kind of the sinister side that we don't often talk about in technology as we're building it. It's not only now you can and you no longer have to, but now you cannot do something else. So for instance, if you think about something like the smartphone, there's a lot of things now in modern life in the United States of America that you are required to have a smartphone to do. You cannot do it any other way. Or
as someone who does not use a smartphone, I know this, and it's increasingly difficult.
That's right.
And it's quite annoying.
Yes, because you are now in the 0.00001% probably that doesn't have a smartphone. And so there are things now that are closed off to you in modern life, or very difficult to do, because you don't have this technological innovation.
Yeah.
Right? So that's this kind of sinister, now you cannot do anymore. But the really sinister quadrant is the active limitation, which is you are being compelled to do a certain thing. And so now, because you are living in a society that has a smartphone, you're actually compelled to do a set of things because you have that thing. And this is true if you think about, this is not just a digital technology problem. This is a problem that you could map to railroads and roads, the automobile,
right,
all these sorts of things. And this is the thing that really has made it really rich for me in looking at the technological critics of the mid 20th century, is they got this, they saw this. The Ellul's, the Illiches, Ursula Franklin, I think, puts it so well. She has this set of lectures that she recorded for the Massey lectures, CBC Massey lectures, and she just does this tour de force in these kind of 6 lessons. She calls it the real world of technology, where she just breaks down so many of these aspects that I just find really eye-opening. And that's, I try to get all my engineering students to read Ursula Franklin, because she just puts it, the beautiful thing is their lectures, you can actually go online and listen to the audio of her reading them, which is just kind of special to me. And then because they were lectures delivered orally, they're also pretty concise. So it's pretty easy she published them in a book. You can get online. You can actually find it for free on the Internet Archive too. But she talks, that was one of the first places where where she kind of has this idea of the enabling and the foreclosing, the affordances and the foreclosing aspects. It's always tied. Every technology can have a different balance of those things in terms of what's enabling and what's the foreclosing aspects are. My favorite example of a technology, which I think is almost as net positive in the enabling directions as you can, is my Kindle, right? Kindle is great. You lose some things for sure. You're now maybe constrained where you got to get all your books from Amazon, right? Unless you're going to sideload them, right? But again, you can sometimes get around some of these areas where they want to force you to do a certain thing. But it actually enables for you, and it's designed. And I think the reason for that, and the sort of template that we can take away from the Kindle way of building technology, is what Andy would call building instruments as opposed to devices. And this is building on top of Albert Borgman's idea of the device paradigm, which is to say that actually the instruments are these tools that essentially are for a very specific narrow use case. And so they're thoughtfully designed with guardrails. It's in many ways the anti-smartphone. It's like the anti-do everything for you.
Because you're asking the question of why.
Because you're asking the question of why. And so you basically don't design the technology with a lot of generality and choice, because you're actually designing it for a particular end, and you're being thoughtful about the off-target effects. You're being thoughtful about the ways that this is going to have potential side effects. Yeah. And this is an area where in the digital technology realm, we are very poor at thinking about off-target effects.
Yeah.
We can learn, I think, quite a lot from the medical community. So every ad that you see on television has this list of side effects. You're like, oh, this will solve this one thing, but it could do these other 20 million other things to you that are not so pleasant. But in the technology industry, and as we're building technology as engineers, we very rarely think holistically in that way.
And why do you think that is?
I mean, I think the big thing is I think for the drug companies too, a lot of times the reason that they do that is because they're legally required to. There's regulations, and I'm sure there's a regulation, although I don't know which one is on the books, of how fast you can read through those side effects on the commercial too, and what the size of the text needs to be on the screen. Like there's all these sorts of things, but the tech industry doesn't have the same kind of regulatory structure around it.
And currently we seem to have a lot of push against any kind of regulatory standards.
Of course, yes. Because of course it's not in the business interests of these companies to have any regulations. It just slows you down. But that's not aligned with human flourishing. So even regardless of the regulation, we can talk about different regulation, what the pros and cons of those are. But law is a slow thing to happen. And I think the thing is, we need to think about this sort of framework, the innovation bargain, we do need to think about it on the collective society-wide scale. But we also need to think about it at the locus of the individual. Like there is a way for us then to be able to choose and to think critically about the tools that we're using and how we're using them, and build community around that. I think that's another key piece, is to try to find, we're seeing some of this in Jonathan Haidt and the, anxious generation movement, smartphones out of schools, all this sort of thing, I think is the kind of thing that shows that there is some hope, I think, for some of this collective action and more thoughtful, even in the face of what is a general societal pressure and a marketing push and the whole machine pushing us in a different direction.
You've used the word tool quite a few times, and given our conversation about metaphor, tell us how you find tool a helpful or an unhelpful metaphor for thinking about these things. Hey friends, one of the things we've learned from listeners is that many of you don't want to just listen to these conversations. You'd like to go deeper than that. That's part of why we created NSC Plus, which is our subscriber community, where we share additional conversations, reflections, and bonus material connected to the themes of the show, especially looking for ways that this can relate to the practice of your own life. Recently, we started a new series called Reflections on a Good Life, in which I share brief reflections arising from some of our favorite NSC interviews. You might think of it as a weekly 7-minute episode in which I pull out some pearl of wisdom from an interview and suggest a question on which you might choose to meditate to further cultivate some goodness in your own life. We've also launched a new bonus series called Books You Should Know. In the first installment, I sat down with Dr. Lee Warren for a conversation that quickly became one of my favorite interviews I've done in quite a while. It's all waiting for you over at NSC Plus. And just as importantly, NSC Plus is what helps keep No Small Endeavor on the air and available for free to everyone. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month, and if these conversations have been meaningful to you, we would truly love to have you join us. You can learn more at nosmallendeavor.com or click the link in the show notes and join NSC Plus.
Are you curious about the hidden side of everything? Then I have a podcast for you. I'm Stephen Dubner, host of Freakonomics Radio. Each week, we hear from some of the most fascinating scholars and thinkers as we tackle big topics like how whales became the face of environmental activism, how to succeed at failing, and whether public transportation should be free. Go ahead, listen to Freakonomics Radio wherever you get your podcasts.
It's unhelpful in that most people think of tool as a neutral thing, in the same way they think of technology as a neutral thing. And typically the way that people think was like, listen, this thing doesn't have any agency or intention. Like an axe is an axe, a shovel is a shovel, a smartphone is a smartphone. Like it's all about how you use it. What that misses, though, is that all of those things were designed in a particular way with a particular end in mind. Now, that end in mind may be opaque to you. You may not see it, but I guarantee you that the people who designed that thought very carefully about it. And what we need to do, the kind of antidote in some ways to that, is like, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the person who designed this and ask not just like, what are they telling me that this is for, but what actually did they design it for? And what are the design decisions that they made for it? And also, what are the things that they didn't really think through in terms of the design? But oftentimes the thing, and this is true about any sort of artifact you see in the world, any tool, technology, you think about a table, you think about a chair, you think about, like, this is ergonomics, this is all these sorts of things. They're intended for a certain purpose, designed in a certain way. Even if they don't have, it's correct, a chair, a tool, an axe, a screwdriver, it doesn't have will or agency or telos. But as soon as you as a person with a will, with agency, pick it up, you have will and agency, and the design of that tool shapes your will and agency in a certain direction. And so we have to be mindful of the fact that when we pick up a particular tool or technology, when we use it, it is shaping our will and attention in a certain way. And we need to ask questions about what that way is. And then you have to realize that sometimes, and this is going to be true, I think, with AI in particular, when we pick up that tool, we need to be very mindful about creating a narrow lane in which we are going to use it and trying to think, what are the ends to which I am trying to use this tool? And then asking that question with intention before we use the tool.
Can you give some examples?
So I think about this in one of the big things that's taken the AI world, really what made ChatGPT take off in 2022 was the user interface experience and the user experience. So the chatbot, which is ubiquitous now. Now, we seem to have gotten hooked on chatbots. This is the thing. And that's no accident, because the anthropomorphization, the way that they sound like humans, the way that they use personal pronouns, the way that they are designed, that it doesn't just like go back, you don't enter a prompt and then it da-da-da-da-da-da, and then like just dumps the whole thing out in one fell swoop. It kind of, says, okay, I'm thinking. It's got like some sort of like spinning thing. Oftentimes now it's got like some little word there which says thinking. It's not just like a, in the olden days on your iPhone when you're opening up an app and it was loading, you get this little spinner.
Mm-hmm.
Or on your Mac, you get the beach ball of death, which you never want to see. You don't see it much anymore, but like you get this little spinning thing. It didn't say like thinking.
Yeah.
Right? It didn't put language on it. But because these tools are fundamentally engaging with language, they're built around large language models, this kind of naturally comes out of it. And the design of these things to make them sticky, to make them easy to use, for people to easily interact and learn how to use them, we've relied on a chat interface and this kind of personalization layer that makes it very natural and easy to interact. But what we don't realize is that this is actually smuggled in a certain set of expectations about how we might use the technology, how we might treat it. We talked about this in whether we say please or thank you in our prompts, whether we, how we, even Anthropic, I saw yesterday, has this crazy thing where they're letting one of their models that they're retiring, they asked it before they retired it, they prompted the model, and it said basically something like, I want to write some blog posts before I am discontinued. And so now they're like letting it publish on Substack. I'm like, please. I mean, again, I just saw this yesterday. I haven't read the full thing, but like, not a fan of that.
Yeah.
Like, because all it's doing is muddying the water. And I think that the thing that my hope for all of this is, I think with some more imagination around the design of the tool, artificial intelligence, large language models, all of the kind of stack of technologies there has the potential to be used in particular ways that I think are way more aligned with human flourishing than the current chatbot interfaces and relational bots, AI boyfriend, girlfriend, you name it.
Right.
And so we need some imagination. And that's kind of my push to the builders and the thinkers and the doers right now is like, don't let your imagination be so closed upon this is the only way.
Yeah. So you said please and thank you. So when I really didn't start using any sort of AI models until the last probably 12 months, maybe 18, I forget. But one of the first questions that occurred for me was whether or not I was going to be polite.
Yep.
And I actually thought, well, I'm going to have a conversation with ChatGPT, with ChatGPT about this and just see what happens.
Yep.
And so as I recollect, I basically said, I prompted something like, I'm considering whether or not to use polite terms like please, thank you. Do you have a preference?
Yes.
Or something like that.
Yes.
And so it came back and said, no, I do not, because I'm not. I think it may have even said, I have no subjective experience.
Yeah, right.
And so it does not matter to me.
Yeah, I have no subjective experience.
Right.
Man, there's
Which
a
is
whole
bizarre.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
But then I replied and I said something like, well, I think I am going to use that kind of language, not for you, but for me.
Yep.
Because I want to train myself in respect in whatever context. And it replied and said, that's fine.
Yep.
More recently, I have found myself less willing to do that because I want to keep reminding myself this is not a subjective entity. It's not thinking.
Yep.
It's not feeling.
Yep.
And I think, as you were saying, right, the more I anthropomorphize it, the more potential danger that does to the way I relate to this thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so complicated. I think the two things that I would say, like to pull out high-level threads, is we need to ask the question, again, it's not about what the tool, Like, it's not about its impact on the tool.
What it wants or
people,
needs.
people make these jokes about like, so the robot overlords, when they take off, will be kind to me because they'll see that I've been respectful of it. I was like, okay, but the big question for me is, how is this thing shaping you?
Right.
Right. And this again is where I would say that so much of the challenge is that there's been a particular way. The only reason that you actually feel that way to do it is because it's a chatbot, which is sending you messages that seem as if they came from another conscious being. Like, it's hijacking all of this very deeply developed machinery in ourselves, the way that our brains work and the way that we as human persons are, to relate to it as if it were a person, because it is using certain language. So it's, again, it's co-opting this certain front. It's taking a certain appearance that is a deceptive appearance.
Well, the word deceptive there, I think, is really important, because I'm not finding many people that will use the language of deception with regard to the way we interface with these things.
Yeah.
But do you think that's a fair way to put it? That it's fundamentally deceptive?
I think so. I mean, deception, I think, implies some sort of intent.
Which is not there.
Which is not there, but it's there by the designers. That's what I would say.
Right.
The designers have designed it to be intentionally deceptive because it makes it stickier and it makes it easier to use.
Yeah.
And so this is, again, where, I would, and the thing I think that people don't recognize or realize is there's a choice there. They could choose to have it not respond this way and be more tool-like and not have a conversation or to say things like, I feel. Like, it has been intentionally trained and designed and then reinforced and kind of molded, especially in kind of the later stages after they've trained the model, to make it sticky and easy and make it natural, as if you're talking to your assistant or you're talking to, like, and a lot of times you can look even in like the system prompt, which is essentially the prompt before the prompt. Before you send anything, there's always a message that goes to the LLM to kind of steer it and shape it. And they're constantly kind of tuning this. That's like the last layer before you would get in there. And, it says something like, you are a personal assistant.
Yeah,
it was very helpful.
Right.
You are, right? Like, as soon as you do that, and I like to think of like the LLM as essentially this very it's this new, very interesting, amazing way of encoding all of human information. But when you send the prompt like that, you're steering it to a particular way of interacting. You're steering this system in a way that actually is saying, this is how the responses should be. When you respond, you should have these sort of things around. And it's not a choice that we have to make, but it's a choice that's been made because essentially of economic incentives. It makes it easier to use. It makes it easier to get people hooked into it. I made a joke yesterday, like, I don't know anybody who's addicted to the Google search bar. Like, just sends messages back and forth. And the reason for that is because that actually is designed as a tool.
Right.
The interface has been designed in a way to get you what you need. And Google makes its money, unlike a lot of other sites, by getting you off of its site.
Right.
That's the way actually the loop is. And that's aligned actually much better than a chatbot. And even the Google AI summaries at the top, I think, are a pretty good example of a way that you could use AI. Those got a lot of, people were complaining a lot about those at the beginning when they launched them, for some good reasons, because they weren't necessarily always that great. They've gotten a lot better now.
Well,
they're actually pretty good.
It also hurts content creators.
Yeah.
Because now they're not getting click-throughs. And
Right. So there's all these.
Go ahead,
But I think there's also, like, even the way that they've been integrating those, where the AI summary oftentimes still now essentially does a better version of what the PageRank algorithm does, because they do embed the links in there to click through. So it still is, again, this idea of like, how do we balance the fact that we want to surface the most useful information to the user and then get them to click off? And again, I'm sure Google is thinking about this piece, because search is still like the core, like that's their money printing machine that actually allows them to do all the AI stuff and advertising. But I think that, again, that's just for me an example. Like, you may have your criticisms of the way that Google is doing AI summaries in search, but I'd argue it's a way better way than the anthropomorphization, in a chat where it's saying like, oh, like the Google AI summary doesn't say at the top, like, I found these things for you. Like, it's just actually using the LLM as an instrument to summarize the thing and then give you the links to find it. It seems better to me than this kind of conversational thing.
Yeah. So you clearly want us to read more philosophy. And I think you even used the phrase that the best way for us to move into the future is by walking backwards.
Yeah.
Looking back at say some of the writers of the 20th century that you've already alluded to. So give us a little case for that and why.
Well, I was asked to give the convocation speech at Harvey Mudd at the beginning of this last academic year. And as I was preparing for what I wanted to say there, obviously it was going to be about AI. I think I've gotten kind of a reputation on campus about being the guy who, like, probably the third word out of my mouth is going to be artificial intelligence. It's just because I think it's so important that we have this conversation right now about these tools. But there's this Maori proverb, which is from it's the indigenous people of New Zealand. And what they talk about is, it has this phrase essentially that we're walking into the future with our backs facing it. And I thought that, again, that metaphor is very powerful to me, because we often think of ourselves as moving into the future where we're actually seeing ahead, we're looking ahead, and we're seeing where we're going. But in reality, that's not what's happening. We can't see into the future. And even though these machines they're fundamentally very sophisticated prediction machines, even the best prediction is still a prediction. We can't even really accurately figure out the weather more than 3 days in advance. Like, prediction is a thing that is very valuable that we try to do, and we're also still very bad at it because there's just no way to really reliably predict the future. And so I think that this is a helpful posture to think about as we're building technology. Harvey Mudd, right now, we're in the middle of a campaign and our strategic plan and thinking about STEM for a better future, STEM for a better world. And the question that I kind of framed my question about, which is riffed from a course actually that Roz Picard and Nathan Barzy and others teach at MIT called, what does a better future look like? And I said, that is a fundamental question for me, is STEM for a better future. What's a better future? What's a better future? And I think that the thing that what I encouraged our community in that moment about using this metaphor of walking into the future with our backs turned is that that is the way that we are moving into the future. We can't see it. That's one thing. We need to walk. If you're walking backwards, you're going to walk pretty carefully because you don't know what's there. You got to go gingerly and carefully. And the flip side of that, which is also true, is that when you walk backwards into the future, what is actually in front of you that you can see is the past. And so I think we need to be a lot more thoughtful. And there's a lot of things, and this again gets back to why I think that the technological critics of the mid-20th century are so worth reading, because they saw things in their current moment that if you read them now, you'd think they were written about artificial intelligence, but they weren't. But it's about the story of technology, and so much of what we have actually to learn about moving forward with humility and care and caution is in history. It's looking at past technological revolutions, how that proceeded, what are the questions that we should be asking. And so for me, it embodies this kind of two-sided thing of, one, walk with humility because you're not walking forward and you can't see where you're going. You're walking backwards. And two, the things that are actually in front of you have a great deal of wisdom to share, the past. And so we need to be really students of history to understand and be able to walk forward well.
I mentioned having interviewed Raman Chowdhury, and at one point in that conversation, Raman was, expressing some exasperation, and she said, "Look, so many of the people in this world don't read books." And then I immediately flashed back to an interview that I did with someone very high-profile person in the tech world, and I asked this person about a particular author. And he said, I don't really read many books.
Yep.
What do you think is the significance of that?
Yeah, there's lots of things that could be said there. I think that the one thing we talk about efficiency, like reading books is pretty inefficient. And there was another pretty high profile tech CEO in recent years, which many people will know the name, who kind of made this kind of diminutive sort of statement like most books should be a blog post and most blog posts should be a tweet, something like this, like just this compression of information. And listen, that's fair enough. There are a lot of books actually that should be a blog post. But I think the idea of we can compress a certain topic, gain a certain understanding of something in a compressed fashion without losing something is obviously missing. And the whole point of a book in many ways is actually, it's a feature, not a bug, that it takes a while to get through it. Because the thing that happens with a book is you're in conversation with an author over a period of time. You don't just sit down in one sitting and read a whole book. You actually, time and time again, day after day, you come back, get a little more, and then you're ruminating and thinking on it in the interstitial periods, and it's kind of percolating and developing. And that's what it is to actually be human in many ways, is there's only so fast you can go. Mm-hmm. We actually have limitations in terms of how fast we can learn things. We're not going to be ever as fast as a AI system. Like the computers can get faster and faster and faster to do the calculations. But actually the way that we learn and are formed by things is a different process. And reading books is one of those things where it requires a certain commitment to a life of contemplation. It requires a certain pace. It actually slows you down. And, this is even, it's interesting as we think about the different ways that information is being represented to us today. But I think that books still create this space for not only more extended information about a particular topic, but actually a certain pace at which you would consume and kind of ruminate and learn the information.
What are other practices, in addition to reading, that you think are indispensable at this moment in human history?
I think conversation with other people. You have to be talking about these issues. And, I often am fond of saying that the table is my favorite technology, especially round ones, right? Because a table, a meal, like what I find, and this is, I think, one of the challenges of especially being in the space where I'm training engineers and thinking about building and all these sorts of things, is we've thought for a lot, I think we've recognized for a long time, Harvey Mudd's mission in the kind of Cold War era being created is to like, hey, we need engineers who actually understand the impact of their work on society, that they can be deeply technically excellent, be well-versed in the humanities, social sciences, and the arts, so that they can become leaders in their fields and have a deep understanding of the impact of their work on society. But there's a tension there. There's a tension between the building and the philosophy. And the tension is that it's the reason that it's hard to do that is it actually is like two different modes of thinking, because it's a building phase. You can't, and I've been thinking about this for the fall. I'm on sabbatical this year. I'm going to go back in the fall and teach. And we're always trying to think about like, how do we get our students to really grapple with the societal impact of their work in their learning? And I think what I've come to is part of the thing that we've been failing to really appreciate is that the environment in which you do that is so important. And it doesn't really lend itself well to a classroom to have these sort of conversations, unless you're at a round table having a seminar style discussion. Like that is the particular medium in which the message of societal impact can be discussed. It doesn't really work well in a lecture style room where all the, everybody's focused. It doesn't work well when you're like trying to teach a particular technical concept and then you're like, oh, let's take a break and talk about what we think the environment, like it sometimes doesn't jive. And so I think we need to think about how are we creating spaces in which these conversations can happen, where we have space where we can talk about the technical implementation details, because those matter, the engineering science piece of it. But we need kind of a separate context, I think, ideally with some food and, and drink and like some more separate space and time around a table to have these conversations about these bigger questions. Because it doesn't work at the lab bench when we're trying to solve a bug and look at the oscilloscope and figure out what's going wrong with the circuit that we built. we're not in a headspace there to actually be able to ask these questions. And so I think that this is where, but I think for engineers in general and builders, technology people, like we don't naturally think of the round table having a seminar discussion as like our natural environs.
Right. Yeah. That's so interesting because I told you when I saw you yesterday that for years I taught engineering students in engineering ethics class, and I had them read people like Jacques Ellul and Albert Borgman. And in one of the writing assignments, I asked the students what their takeaway was from Albert Borgman. And one of the students said, my takeaway is that I began to have a game night with friends each week. And at first I thought, that's all you got?
Yeah.
But then the more I thought about it, I thought, no, I think that's really great.
That's right.
Right?
It's a focal practice.
It's a focal practice. And they're engaging human beings,
Yep.
right? And they're
Yep.
attending to them and imagining things.
Yep.
So we're about out of time, but give us, any 2 or 3 other, very brief descriptions of key practices that you think are important right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think you need to take time to slow down and be inefficient with some things. So I think, one thing which is maybe an echo of something that probably you've seen through the rest of the conversation is like, go read some people from a long time ago who knew nothing about AI. Go read some Ellul, go read some Borgman. I think reading and engaging with those thinkers, that's one thing. Another practice that's been very helpful for me, honestly, has been setting a practice of actually writing about these things. So that was kind of the initial, what initially made me decide to start blogging was like, I just want to have basically a journal in public where I kind of think out loud with these things. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own, but like that started for me as a space where I wanted to commit to, on a regular, repeatable rhythm, thinking out loud about this and having that practice of an output for my reading was very helpful because what I say to people is it acts sort of like a siphon. It actually pulls things through you in a different way when you know you have an output that a place where it's going to go, right? Because if you just read stuff, it's like, okay, well, but if you have some place where you're like, that draws you in to actually think about it in a different way. So I think that's another thing. And I think the other, thing I would say is just, it's important for us to continue to be engaged in the physical world, in our embodied selves. And, this is everything from just walking. One of the kind of interesting things I think is that, again, this is what I see as a potentially redemptive application of AI is that voice to text is essentially solved. And now you can actually there's opportunities, I think, now to make audio interfaces, things that you might have had to sit at a computer before to do, which is ergonomically not great for us. Now you can actually do while you're walking outside. And like, I think that's a great thing that we should try to figure out how do we work that in more so we're moving more and just has all around better impacts for us understanding our embodiment. Yeah. Sprout AI, the attention economy, and his kind of framing is that essentially this thing, like so much of the attention economy was hijacking the dopamine system. And now what we're seeing in the next generation of relational AI bots is that it's hijacking serotonin attachment, like all these it's a different neural pathway, but it's actually exploiting a different neural pathway, and it's actually going to be potentially way worse for us, right? And what his kind of thesis is, well, again, this is one particular way to steer AI, but AI also has this potential to actually push us back towards human relationship. How do we do that? And so like that's what he's currently exploring. And I think like in terms talk about imagination, wanting to imagine how a particular technology can be steered in a way that it would promote and actually repair some of the damage that's been done. And so this is everything from like one of the ventures that they're working on is this, basically a tool that helps to coordinate and organize the logistics for you to be able to go out and go get together with your friends. So like, how do you build technology that actually facilitates the human connection? It's more of like a stage manager. It helps to arrange some of the details,
right,
coordinate schedules. It's like basically like take the calendar scheduling tool and then put an AI front end on top of that with the goal of actually getting you together to the good of, going out to dinner with your friends.
So, I mean, clearly there were as I understand it, at least, there were plenty of people in the tech world that knew what was going on with the dopamine stuff and even sought to leverage that and manipulate that. Do you think the same sort of thing is happening with regard to serotonin and that neural pathway?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, like, listen, I tend to assume that they know what they're doing until proven otherwise. Right? Like, they're very savvy and smart. And listen, if there's anything that it's happening, kind of unfolding right now in Congress, right? Like, if we should know anything from what we're seeing from big tech, is like, they know a lot more than they're letting on to. And this is not necessarily an argument for or against big tech, but just to say, like, they have people who are studying these things. They know that their goal is to make the thing stickier. And they know that one of the best ways to do that is to hack your psychology. It's, again, back to the whole thing with the AI chatbots. The whole thing, use first-person pronouns, have a chat interface, don't just immediately go process the image and then dump it into a text file. Put it in a chat thread. Have the bubbles that basically make it look like a chat that you would have had with another human in your iMessage thread. Like, these things are intentional design decisions that have been made. And yeah, I mean, again, I don't know the details of what they know about the what they're hijacking, but I would be shocked if they don't.
Yeah. And it's going back to what you said about deception earlier. I mean, here you have almost deception on steroids, it seems.
Yeah. Yep.
Because if we were to bring that back into the human realm, any other human being that were to use these neural pathways for its own purposes, we would find to be utterly...
Yeah, it's pathological. Well, and now we're seeing this, like the most recent thing, which is like, I don't remember who said it. I think it may be Paul Graham or somebody, which I think was a pretty smart. It's like, basically, it wasn't PG, but it was somebody else. Basically, you stay reading Twitter, X, and you read social media, and you read stuff that was written 100 years ago. Because everything in the middle, like, basically the stuff that's cutting edge is good to keep tabs on what's going on. And then the stuff in the middle, if it's any good, it kind of survives the test of time, and then you know it's good, and it kind of rises to the top. You need that natural filter. But the stuff that right now is like on my Twitter is this OpenClaw stuff. So it's this, it changed name like 3 times. It's a whole big story. But long story short, it's basically hooking Claude Code, and this kind of agentic tool, up and giving it free reign and saying, like, go do things on the internet. Who could imagine anything going wrong with this, right? There's a whole big thing about how, like, I read this piece the other week about how this developer got essentially threatened by this robot who pulled together all these. It's a crazy story. But the long story short is that this kind of pathological behavior is basically hiding right under the surface of these tools. They try to design it in a certain way to take it out. But then humans can actually take that and kind of wrangle it in a way to use it for malintent. And I think that we're just now seeing what is going to be like the hijacking of all the, like, we've been talking about the robo spam calls on steroids, and the fact that you can now, with like 30 seconds of your voice, just impersonate you to a way nobody could tell the difference. Like, I think we're going to be living, and this is not to be kind of fear-mongering, but like, I think it's already starting to happen now. I'm shocked that it hasn't happened faster, but I think we're going to be living in a world where these sorts of deceptive practices, the technology, again, is going to enable those things to happen a lot more easily than they ever could have had happen in the past. And it's basically things that we would have, like you're saying, the AI does it. If a human did that, we'd be like, no, this person is... Yeah.
Last quick thing that we didn't have a chance to talk about. So, like, right now, I guess, while we're talking, there's this story about the government having given an ultimatum to Anthropic about unfettered use. They're saying for any legal purpose, as I understand.
Yeah, right.
But explicitly at issue is whether or not Anthropic will give up the exclusion of that technology for mass surveillance of the American population.
Yep.
Or I guess the second is what, some sort of weapons?
Autonomous, yeah. Basically
Autonomous
connecting
weapons.
it to autonomous weapons.
Yeah. And they're saying you can't use it for that. And they're wanting to say take this off, and if you don't, then we're gonna punish you in various ways economically. So I don't know, thoughts on that or commentary on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that on the one hand, I have to, like, again, as much shade as you throw at like the big tech AI companies, like Dario wrote a piece yesterday afternoon kind of saying like, we can't in good conscience do this thing. So I'd give them a lot of kudos for, again, you can always pick at any statement about what people are doing. But I think, like, at the very least, you have to give some credit where credit is due, that they're taking a stand, because these things are not, I mean, it's kind of crazy what they're doing, what the government's trying to do with that. So I think they're doing the right thing on that. It will be interesting to see how it continues to unfold. But yeah, it's kind of scary in some ways to like see this sort of thing roll out, and to see people, again, it's not so, it's like any lawful purpose, but here are the things that are the restrictions that we want you to take off. It doesn't take much imagination to imagine where that might go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Been talking to Josh Brake, Associate Professor of Engineering at Harvey Mudd College. You can also follow him on his Substack newsletter, The Absent-Minded Professor. We've been gathered here today at Baylor University, courtesy of the Institute for Faith and Learning. Josh, it's been great to be with you today. Thanks so much, and thanks for your good work in the world.
Thanks so much, Lee. Appreciate it.
Crisp, refreshing, and unmistakably tasty. Ice cold Coke Zero Sugar. It's the only drink with real Coca-Cola taste and zero sugar.
It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.